Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on the top political stories of the day. I'm Frank Festa, and thanks for being with us. All 435 House seats are up for grabs this year, but, as is often the case, the balance of power will come down to around a dozen key races around the country. Republicans are looking to hold on to their slim 221 to 214 majority, as Democrats seek a net gain of 4 seats to flip the lower chamber. In their most recent House ratings, out at the beginning of this month, the nonpartisan rating outlets Inside Elections had 10 seats rated as toss-ups, meaning calling who's going to win is as good as flipping a coin. In our latest look at the battle for the House of Representatives, I'm joined by Nathan Gonzales, the publisher and editor of Inside Elections, to take a closer look at their analysis. Hey Nathan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. It's always good. You know, the other times must have gone okay, or else you wouldn't have had me back, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, second time's the charm, right? We'll give you another chance. I was going to say, you were on the show about a year ago. This must be your annual appearance.
It's the beginning of spring and the Ballotpedia podcast appearance. Those are the two things on the calendar. So
yeah, that's what the end of March is known for. Well, great to have you back on the show. Always a pleasure. Wanted to start out our conversation with just the general thought. Are we officially past it's too early to be talking about this stage of the election cycle for Congress?
Well, I think it's always time to be talking about congressional elections. Now, maybe it's from a business interest in that, but there are different phases of the cycle, right? I mean, part of the cycle is backward looking at what has happened in these districts in the past. Now we're kind of in the primary season, getting some nominees, evaluating candidates and how the quality, and then later in the cycle, it'll be about polling and where are these races actually moving, or are they moving at all? So it's never too early, Frank. It's always time to talk congressional races.
Yeah, this stuff is changing all the time too. You know, I feel like your evaluations change, the forecasts change. There's always news coming in. So I feel like for us, obviously, this is what we do for a living, but it is really interesting to watch how things change over the course of the year.
Yeah, and in our ratings, and we're gonna talk about the ratings. They're not set in stone, right? The goal is not to find a rating in January of the beginning of the cycle and then never change it. You know, as events happen, candidates primaries happen, whatever it might be, you know, we need to be open to and inflexible with our ratings.
Definitely agreed. And we're going to get into all of those ratings today. We're talking mostly about the House, but before we get too far into talking about the lower chamber, is it safe to say that the House is going to be the more competitive of the two chambers this year? Or is that, again, still too early, kind of too early of an evaluation? Even though the Democrats have a slim majority in the Senate, I saw your most recent ratings from last month only had 2 races rated as toss-ups in the Senate. But I guess, right, that would be enough to flip the balance of power there too, right?
Yeah, both the House and the Senate are competitive. I mean, it's so close. The margins are so close that it's like choosing between. We have 4 kids. It's like choosing between which is my favorite kid, right? And we love them all the same. But the Senate, it's just less complicated because there are fewer races. Maybe it's less complicated because Republicans have such a great opportunity. I mean, just to quickly. They need +2 for a majority, but they can control the Senate by +1 and winning the White House, because then the vice president would break a 50-50 tie. They basically already have West Virginia in the bag. So if West Virginia plus a Trump victory, that's the ball game. Let's say Trump doesn't win, then they need a +2. They need a second seat, but they have 6, 7, 8 opportunities to get that seat, including the ones where the Republicans are laser focused on Ohio and Montana. And so, the Senate's just less complicated, fewer races, but the House is going to be hot. It's going to be a spicy, a spicy run for the majority in the House.
Yeah, lots of exciting races going on. And last I checked, Inside Elections has 10 races in the House currently rated as toss-ups.
Correct.
There are some other races on either side of, the toss-up category. Toss-up obviously means that it could be a flip of a coin in either direction, but there's races that tilt for either party in one direction or another. There are 3 Democratic House seats or races that are tilted for the Democrats, if I have that correct, meaning that they have a slight advantage in those races, and they're bound to be close. But for the most part, control of the House is going to come down to these 10 races that y'all have rated as toss-ups that we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. But before we get into them, I thought we would start with some of the races that have fallen out of that toss-up category lately, as recently as February 9th, you guys had two more races, both in my home state of New York. New York the 22nd congressional district and the third congressional district there. But they recently, in your most recent ratings, they're no longer included. So bring our listeners up to speed. What happened in New York 22 and then New York 3?
Yeah, New York 3 might be, we'll walk through them both. New York 3, this is the race on Long Island where George Santos, the Republican, was expelled from the House. Right. So there needed to be a special election in order to fill that seat. It ended up being filled by former Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi, who is now a current Democratic Congressman again after winning that race. We had it in toss-up in the thinking that it was going to be an open seat, that Santos wasn't going to end up being the nominee. It was a placeholder as things kind of shook out. Now that there is a Democratic incumbent, it is a district that Biden would have won. We expect Biden to win again. Through redistricting, right. Democrats made it a little more Democratic, and so that is why we now have Suozzi in our lean Democratic category. Different situation, but in the 22nd district, but it's still New York. But this is a Republican Congressman, Brandon Williams, who Democrats made his district a little more Democratic. He was already vulnerable, thus him being in the toss-up category. Now he's the district is made by Democrats to be a little bit more Democratic, and so Democratic enough that I think he should be regarded as an underdog for re-election, because we have to remember there's a high correlation between how a district votes for president and how it votes for the House. In 2020, right. Only 16 districts voted for split their ticket between the presidential race and the House race. So when you're looking at these kind of split districts, split between the party of the member of the House and how it voted for president, you need to look at those closely, because those split tickets are the exception rather than the rule when it comes to how voters are voting.
Nice. We'll get into how convoluted some of those districts can be when they go, maybe one way for the president and they're represented by, someone from the other party. But can you explain the path to gaining the majority in the House through the lens of these toss-ups? I think it can be pretty confusing, honestly, even for somebody like me who spends a lot of time looking at this stuff. So explain the path to gaining the majority for the Democrats.
Well, and it can be confusing to me. I do this for a living, Frank, and I have sheets in front of me that people can't see, or if you're watching the video of this, you'll see why I'm looking down, because I want to make sure I keep it straight. But the path to the majority is easier for Republicans. If they win all of the districts where we think they are favored, so these are all the solid, likely, lean, and tilt Republican categories, then Republicans would only need to win 2 out of the 10 toss-up districts to get to 218. That's the magic number. Let's flip it around. If Democrats win all the races where we think they are favored, the solid, likely, lean, tilt Democratic districts, that gets them to 209. So they would need to win 9 out of the 10 toss-up races. Okay. So you'll see that it's close, and the path is easier for Republicans. And this is going back to that correlation. This is based on the assumption of a close and competitive presidential race, where it's the performance in these districts is somewhat close to what they were in 2020. But if the presidential race gets out of hand and one candidate starts to run away with it, then that's going to have an impact on these House races.
I got you. And again, a lot of stuff to follow there. We'll be following it as closely, and not as closely as you guys are, but we'll be waiting on, every one of your updates with all the different forecasts. In preparing for our conversation, I think I told you this before we got talking today, before we started recording interview. I listen to your guys' podcast all the time. We'll get you a quick plug and maybe link a episode in our show notes for you guys. I really enjoy it. But
if people, we appreciate that. And if people, it's really a hard name to remember. It's called the Inside Elections Podcast. It's catchy. We workshop that.
Spell that for us?
Yeah. It's really, we spent a lot of time on the name, but yeah, please check it out. But go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, listening to your podcast, one of the recent episodes, I heard you and your colleagues talking about North Carolina District 1 as being particularly interesting to all of you. So I was wondering if you could bring us a little snippet and some insight from that conversation here today. What's going on in North Carolina District 1?
Yeah, well, in North Carolina's first district, you have a Democratic Congressman, Don Davis, who is vulnerable. the broader context is that redistricting was a key factor into our ratings because Republicans redrew the map post 2020, post 2022, heading into these 2024 elections. Mm-hmm. One of the results of that is there were 3 Democratic members that Republicans made their districts basically unwinnable for a Democrat, and they're not even running for re-election. So I'm talking about Kathy Manning, Wiley Nickel, and Jeff Jackson. But Republicans also made this first district more Democratic, and so more Republican, and so that's why Don Davis is vulnerable. I mean, this is kind of an inland Northeast North Carolina district that Biden won it, but just with more than 50%. And so the more recent development was that there was a Republican primary, and now Republicans have a nominee, Lori Buckout, a veteran, and this primary was critical because also running in the primary was a woman who ran before and had a lot of baggage. There were allegations of domestic abuse and domestic assault in terms of the allegations that she was doing. She was the one perpetrating that abuse, and so Republicans really worked to make sure that she was not the nominee, and that worked. And so now it's one of the top 10. It's one of our 10 toss-up races.
Nice. And then another one from that list, the next one that I think that was most interesting to us over here was out in Oregon 5, which features a Republican incumbent and a Democratic primary. Did that Democratic primary take place yet, or is that still coming up soon?
Not yet. Still upcoming, I believe, in May. I should know this because I'm from Oregon. I haven't lived there. I haven't lived there in a while. This district is sort of mid-Willamette Valley. For those of you that are very familiar with Oregon, this is the Willamette Valley that is east of I-5, but then it goes into central Oregon and Bend, which has been a high-growth area. A lot of folks from California moving to the area. And the Republican Congressman Lori Chavez DeRemer, she's running for re-election, but there's a big fight on the Democratic side because you have in 2022, Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner defeated incumbent Kurt Schrader in the primary, and she was viewed as she kind of ran to his left, and because she won that primary, Democrats didn't invest in the race in terms of the parties and the outside groups in a big way because they thought, well, the more moderate incumbent lost. Now we have this more progressive challenger. It ended up being a very close race, even though Democrats didn't invest in it. So let's fast forward to now. There's a primary state legislator, Janelle Bynum, who is running and saying, I'm electable. But one of the things that she's saying is that she has defeated Lori Chavez DeRemer in the past in 2 state legislative races. So that's what she's saying. But McLeod Skinner has high name ID coming into the race. And so there's been this real effort to consolidate behind Janelle Bynum because a lot of Democrats think she is a better candidate. I would be remiss if I didn't also say that there have been new allegations or unsurfaced allegations of alleged abuse from McLeod Skinner and a campaign aide going back to the 2022 race. It was in a Willamette Week article. So that makes Democrats uncertain and some Democrats working even harder to try to make sure that she's not the nominee. So that's some of my bias showing Oregon. I grew up in what's now the 6th district on the other side of I-5, a little town called Dallas. But Oregon 5 is one of our top 10, our top toss-ups.
Did you go to Oregon University, the University of Oregon?
I did not. I went to Vanguard University down in Costa Mesa, California, which is Katie Porter's district that she's leaving. But I grew up as a Oregon State Beavers fan, and still root for the Beavers. Now that are in the Pac-2, apparently.
I can't keep track of the conferences.
With Washington State, it's just 2 of them, so we'll see how that goes.
Some of those conferences are so crazy now, too. Like, I'm from New Jersey, but, like, Rutgers is in, like, I'm pretty sure they're in, like, a Middle America conference now or, like, something like that. There's so many new conferences, I can't even try with them.
Yeah, and now the Oregon has gone, University of Oregon and the Ducks have gone to the Big Ten or however many teams are there now. The idea that the Oregon volleyball teams are going to go to Ann Arbor and play is just, feels a little short-sighted.
Yeah. We'll see. That's a whole other podcast for us. What's going to happen with all that in the next 5 to 10 years?
We're listening like, what is this? What is it? We're off the rails.
Well, to get back on track, those are 2 of the 10 toss-ups that you all are watching. Of the other 8, which are the most competitive or interesting to you? Do you guys have a ranking system that you use, or are they all competitive in their own unique way?
Yeah, and actually intentionally, I love having ratings and not rankings because you can have races that are different or
Right.
they're in the same likelihood of flipping, but they have different dynamics. And I joke with my colleagues at Roll Call, which I also write for Roll Call newspaper, that
Mhm.
they do rankings, and we'll help them and advise them. But sometimes it's tough to choose between the fourth and the fifth
Sure.
best flip opportunity or something. It's really kind of making distinctions. But looking at this list, another race sticks out to me, and that is Michigan's 7th district. This is the Lansing area and some kind of northwest Detroit suburbs. This is where
Okay.
Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin is not running for reelection because he's running for the U.S. Senate, and it's a district that Biden won with 50%. Michigan is right square in the center of the presidential battleground. There was a new CNN poll where Trump was ahead of Michigan. Trump is ahead of Biden in Michigan, which I assume that means that he would be ahead. Trump would be ahead in this type of district, and so that should be concerning for Democrats. If you want to get to the majority, you got to hold your own race. You had to hold your own seats first, so you can then
Right.
start gaining the seats that you don't have. And it looks like it's going to be the Republican is going to be former state senator Tom Barrett, who lost to Slotkin last cycle, but now it's an open seat. And the Democrat, former state senator Curtis Hertel, who he didn't run last time, obviously, because it was an incumbent. Slotkin was the incumbent, but I think this is a top race. And Frank, I was looking of our 10 toss-ups.
Uh-huh.
Biden won 9 of them. Nine of them. The only one that he didn't win was Washington's 3rd district, now represented by Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
that again shows me if Biden can maintain where he was, what he did in 2020, or do a little better, that keeps Democrats in the hunt. But if he slips, then it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for Democrats.
Yeah, and we have a similar question down in that similar vein. But maybe we could jump there now. It's not necessarily about Biden per se, but outside of some of these toss-up races, I saw some reporting from USA Today late last month that was pretty interesting to me. And you can correct me if I get this wrong, if this comes out a little word salady, but they were saying that the role that districts that Biden won in 2020 and are currently represented by Republicans are going to be critical for the Republicans retaining their slim majority. Do you have a sense of what's going on in those sorts of districts specifically? How maybe Republicans, that are representing districts that Biden won are maybe running their races differently than, Republicans that are representing districts that Trump won?
I think the key is there's diversity in both the Republican and Democratic caucuses on Capitol Hill because there are different types of districts. And let's take the Republican side where if you are John Duarte of California or Mike Garcia in California, who are 2 other Republican incumbents that are in our toss-up category, you have to appeal to a different type of electorate than what Marjorie Taylor Greene has to appeal to, or some of the other Matt Gaetz has to appeal to. So you want to be seen as more independent, more moderate, and maybe more nuanced, and not be viewed as being a part of the same party as those other more provocative members of your party, but legislatively they all have to work together, or things aren't going to get done. And so that's just a different. And for the party that's trying to defeat those members, they're trying to lump them in with the worst case or the more provocative members of each side. And so the conversation is the members that represent these competitive districts are trying to have a more nuanced conversation than what we see in solid blue or solid red districts.
Yeah, I feel like those nuanced conversations can always be really, really interesting too, for just where, these parties are at politically and the disagreements that are going on within them, So definitely interesting to watch what's going to happen there.
and this is where money is a factor, because money is not
Right.
the most important piece of elections, but it helps you drive the conversation. If you have a fundraising advantage and you have more television ads, then you can help dictate either your own how voters view you or dictate what issues are being talked about. And that's why money is critical.
Sure. We are recording this interview, Nathan, on Friday, March 22nd. It's going to come out next Thursday, which is today. Obviously, if you're listening to this today on the 28th. But this week, the 19th, which is last week, if you're listening on the 28th, there were some interesting House matchups in the primaries. Hopefully, you were able to track that.
I don't even know where we are right now, but go for it.
Interesting House primaries in states like California, Ohio, and Illinois on the week of the 19th, on the Tuesday. So anything interesting stick out to you there?
The two big ones were in Illinois, downstate Southern Illinois. Republican Congressman Mike Bost had a very competitive challenge from a former state legislator named Darren Bailey. It's interesting because 10 years ago, Mike Bost was elected and viewed as kind of a crazy bomb thrower because there was footage of him on the floor of the state legislature. The video went viral. He was ranting and he threw these papers up in the air and punched them. And he said, let my people go, and doing this. And Democrats thought that they had him like, oh, this is gold, right? We're going to put this video on TV and voters are going to reject him. Well, it turns out that anger resonated with voters, and he ended up defeating an incumbent named Bill Enyart. And so, but now the world got flipped up on its head, and he was Darren Bailey was trying to portray Mike Bost as a establishment rhino who didn't finish Trump's wall on the border. But it was partially a big threat to Bost because even though Darren Bailey lost the race for governor, he killed it in Southern Illinois, right? That's the red part. We think of Illinois as a blue state, which it is, but not at Southern Illinois is very red. So he had high name ID, high positives with Republican voters. And that made it very close. It ends up that Bost won 51-49. But, we don't root for candidates, but this was a win for Republicans who want to keep getting things done. Meaning Bailey was affiliated with the State Freedom Caucus, the State Freedom Caucus, and a group of Republicans who would have been. Matt Gaetz endorsed him. Maybe that's all I need to say. Matt Gaetz endorsed Darren Bailey, but it was a close race. The other one that's significant is in Ohio's 9th district against Democratic Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur in the Toledo area. She's been in Congress for decades. Republicans drew this district to defeat her, but in 2022, they nominated J.R. Majewski, who, according to our metric at Inside Elections called Vote Above Replacement, he was the lowest performing House Republican candidate in the country.
Wow.
In the country. Had all sorts of problems. The bottom line is that
football in the last draft pick.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't know if we get a trophy. We can deliver he probably would break that trophy in half, but and maybe me in half if we did that.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that Republicans did not nominate him. He ended up dropping out a little bit before the primary. Nominated a guy named Derek Barron, and this is going to be Kaptur. This is going to be a very difficult race. We still have her with an advantage, but depending on how it plays out, I wouldn't be surprised if this creeps into the toss-up category before we get to November.
Yeah, I was going to say races can still become toss-ups. We still have half a year away, right? So there's still plenty of wiggle room there. I wanted to ask, and I don't know if I couldn't get this super clear off just following the forecasts that they come out, but do you guys update those on any sort of schedule? Is it more based off of when you get your news that shakes your perception of things, your evaluation? How does that work?
Great question. Well, quarterly, we do what we call our House overview, where we take a fresh look at everything, and we end up updating almost 100 districts. Analysis, not necessarily changing the rating, but that is a time where we do a ton of phone calls and meetings and talk with folks on both sides and try to just get a fresh look at things. That's usually when we will change things. We don't typically change them based on news unless it is significant, like for a new map in North Carolina. That was a significant piece of news because there are new districts with new lines, and we change things accordingly. But maybe this is one of the faults with our ratings, Frank, or who we are, but I would prefer take a deep breath and pause. Let's say a news event happens. Like, all right, let's pause. We think we might know how this is going to play out, but let's wait and let's identify the trend. Because what I don't want to do is, let's say we have a race in Tossup, and then next week we move it to lean Republican. Like, and then 2 weeks after that, actually it's a toss-up again. Like, now it's lean Democratic. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't think that's really how fluid races are. I think they're probably more incremental, and that's how we generally approach things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like you do it in chunks rather than reacting to every swing in the news. I feel like that's why folks rely on, outlets like yours, and not to give ourselves a plug here too, but outlets like Ballotpedia, because it's a little bit slower and more practical and outside of like the fluctuations of whatever news might be shaking things,
And sometimes our instincts, I would hope our instincts are right in how a news event would play out, but maybe they're not always, right? I mean,
right.
Well, let's take the presidential race. Like, this candidate was indicted 90 plus times in 4 different cases. Of course that candidate's going to be losing. Actually, that candidate's not. That candidate's not losing. So I would prefer to just kind of take a deep breath and wait to see a trend.
Yeah, well, all of our mutual excitement aside, like I mentioned, we're still, I think if my math is right, more than half a year away from any of these elections taking place. Anything you're looking out for between now and then, in broad strokes, trend-wise, that might significantly alter your ratings, and you just brought them up. So outside of our, one of our very old presidential candidates dropping out of the race, or any major legal complications, of course.
I think we're really focused on the primaries. I think it's good to finally get clarity on some of these races. Not that there are a ton of primaries where if one candidate wins, then it's a game changer. But it's just good to finally get to know the matchups. And then once more matchups are known, there will start to be more data. We'll see the campaign committees. We'll see the outside groups, people starting to go in and doing their homework in order to decide where they're going to invest in races heading into the fall. And so I'm excited to get to a period where we're going to be dealing with more data than just fundraising or primary results. It'll be data on, all right, this is where the race is standing. House races can give us a window into the presidential race, because if you're doing a poll in Oregon's 5th district between Chavez DeRemer and one of the 2 Democrats, you're probably also going to take the temperature of the presidential race, and then you can measure, okay, Biden won this district in 2020. Is he still winning it, or by what margin? And you can get that window. House races are a window into the broader picture.
All right, so well, Nathan, we're going to be following your forecast very closely. Thank you again for your time, and I know you had a really busy week, so we really appreciate you making time for us and coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Always, and keep up the good work. Ballotpedia, the ability to look back at previous races and the results is valuable. So I use it. I'm not getting paid to say this, but I do use Ballotpedia for those. That archive is really valuable.
All right, so we really appreciate it, and we'll definitely have to have you back on the show as we get closer to the election and some of all of this becomes a little bit more clear.
Sounds great. We'll see you next time.
Yep. And for our listeners, you can learn more about our election coverage and inside elections forecasts at the links in our show notes. We'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Frank Festa, and thanks for listening.